Can a state tell you who you're allowed to love? Who you're allowed to marry? It might sound like a question from a dystopian novel, but less than a century ago, this was the reality for millions of Americans. In 1967, the U.S. Supreme Court delivered a landmark ruling that would forever change the answer to that question. This is the story of Loving versus Virginia, a case that didn't just change laws. It redefined the very meaning of freedom and equality in America. Our story begins in the 1950s in Caroline County, Virginia. This was the era of Jim Crow, a time when racial segregation was brutally enforced by law. But in this small, rural community, some of those rigid lines began to blur. It was here that a young white man named Richard Loving met a young woman of Black and Native American descent named Mildred Geter. They grew up as neighbors, and over time, their childhood friendship blossomed into a deep and genuine love. They were just two people who wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. The problem, the state of Virginia said they couldn't. At the time, Virginia was one of many states with what were known as anti-mis. These laws explicitly banned marriage between white people and people of color. The very idea was considered a crime against the state. The law in Virginia, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, was one of the strictest in the nation. It classified people into just two categories, white and colored, and prohibited them from marrying each other. For Richard and Mildred, this meant their love was illegal in the only home they had ever known. But Richard and Mildred were determined. In June of 1958, they decided to take a risk. They drove 90 miles north to Washington, D.C., where interracial marriage was legal. There, they were legally married. They received a marriage certificate, a piece of paper that symbolized their commitment and their hope for a future together. Filled with joy, they returned home to Virginia, ready to start their new life as husband and wife. They hung their marriage certificate on the wall of their bedroom, a proud declaration of their union. Their happiness, however, was short-lived. In the early morning hours of July 11th, 1958, just 5 weeks after their wedding, their peaceful life was shattered. Acting on an anonymous tip, the local sheriff and his deputies burst into their home, kicking down the bedroom door. They woke the sleeping couple with flashlights in their faces and demanded to know what they were doing in bed together. Mildred, terrified, pointed to the marriage certificate on the wall. But that piece of paper, their symbol of hope, was worthless in the eyes of Virginia law. In fact, it was evidence of their crime. The sheriff's response was chilling. That's no good here. Richard and Mildred were arrested and thrown in jail. Mildred spent several terrifying nights in a dirty, rural jail cell, separated from her husband. Richard was jailed for one night before his sister bailed him out. Mildred was held for several more days. They were charged with violating Virginia's ban on interracial marriage. They faced a prison sentence of 1 to 5 years. At their trial in January 1959, the Lovins pleaded guilty. The judge, Leon Basile, delivered a sentence that has since become infamous for its blatant racism. He told them, "Almighty God created the races, white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents. And but for the interference with his arrangement, there would be no cause for such marriages." The fact that he separated the races shows that he did not intend for the races to mix. His sentence was a 1-year prison term for both Richard and Mildred, but he offered them a cruel alternative. The sentence would be suspended if they agreed to leave the state of Virginia and not return together for 25 years. Faced with an impossible choice, prison or exile, the Lovings chose exile. They were forced to leave their families, their friends, and the community where they had grown up. They moved to Washington, D.C., a city that was unfamiliar and isolating. They tried to build a new life, and they had 3 children. But they were deeply unhappy. They missed the quiet, country life of Virginia. They missed their families. As Mildred later said, "I wanted to come home. My children didn't know their grandparents. My family was in Virginia and I wanted to be near them." Life in the city was hard. Their children were hit by a car while playing in the street, an accident that intensified Mildred's longing for the safety and familiarity of home. The injustice of their situation weighed heavily on them. They were law-abiding citizens who had been banished simply for marrying the person they loved. By 1963, Mildred had had enough. Inspired by the growing civil rights movement and the March on Washington, she decided to fight back. In a moment of brave desperation, she wrote a letter directly to the U.S. Attorney General, Robert F. Kennedy. Kennedy's office wrote back, advising her to contact the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. This was the turning point. The ACLU saw the potential in the Lovings case to challenge not just Virginia's law, but all similar laws across the country. They assigned two young, ambitious lawyers, Bernard Cohen and Philip Hirschkopf, to take on the case. The legal battle began. Cohen and Hirschkopf's first step was to ask the original judge, Leon Bazile, to vacate his ruling. They argued that the sentence was cruel and unusual punishment. The judge refused, restating his belief in racial segregation. This refusal, however, was exactly what the lawyers needed. It allowed them to appeal the case to a higher court. The case slowly made its way through the Virginia court system, with each court upholding the state's anti-miscegenation. The lawyers argued that the law violated the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War, guarantees all citizens equal protection of the laws. The state of Virginia argued that their law was constitutional because it punished both white and black partners equally. It was a flimsy argument, but one that had held up in court for decades. Finally, in 1967, the case reached the highest court in the land, the United States Supreme Court. The central question was clear. Does a state law that prevents people from marrying solely because of their race violates the Constitution? The Lovings themselves were too shy and intimidated to attend the Supreme Court hearing. Richard, a man of few words, told his lawyer, Mr. Cohen, "Tell the court I love my wife, and it is just unfair that I can't live with her in Virginia." That simple, powerful statement became the heart of their argument. On April 10th, 1967, the lawyers presented their arguments. Philip Hirschkopf opened by comparing Virginia's law to the racist policies of Nazi Germany. Bernard Cohen, in his closing, focused on the fundamental human right to marry. He concluded with Richard Loving's own words, telling the nine Jews, "Tell the court I love my wife." 2 months later, on June 12, 1967, the Supreme Court delivered its unanimous decision. The ruling was a resounding victory for the Lovings and for civil rights. Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote the opinion for the court, and his words were powerful and unambiguous. He wrote, "The freedom to marry has long been recognized as one of the vital personal rights essential to the orderly pursuit of happiness by free men." He dismissed Virginia's argument about equal application of the law, calling it irrelevant. The court declared that any law based on racial classifications was inherently discriminatory and unconstitutional. Warren concluded, "Under our Constitution, the freedom to marry, or not marry, a person of another race resides with the individual and cannot be infringed by the state. Convictions must be reversed." The ruling in Loving versus Virginia was a legal earthquake. It struck down the anti-miscegenation laws in Virginia and the 15 other states that still had them on the books. Overnight, what was once a crime became a constitutionally protected right. For Richard and Mildred Loving, the victory meant they could finally go home. They returned to Caroline County, Virginia, free at last to live openly as husband and wife in the place they loved. They built a house and raised their 3 children in peace. Their fight was over. Tragically, Richard was killed in a car accident in 1975. Mildred, who never remarried, continued to live quietly in their Virginia home until her passing in 2008. The legacy of Loving versus Virginia extends far beyond one couple's story. It established that marriage is a fundamental right and that laws discriminating based on race have no place in America. The case became a cornerstone for future legal battles for equality, including the fight for marriage equality for same-sex couples, which cited the Loving decision in the 2015 Supreme Court case, Obergefell v. Hodges. The story of Richard and Mildred Loving is a powerful reminder that history is often changed, not by politicians or generals, but by ordinary people who have the courage to demand justice. They weren't activists or revolutionaries. They were just two people in love who believed they had the right to build a life together. Their quiet determination and unwavering love challenged a system of hate, and in doing so, helped bend the arc of the moral universe a little closer toward justice for everyone. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as inspiring as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the famous cases that have shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what other legal stories you'd like to see covered. See you next time.